Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our talk. I'm just going to give it a few minutes for everyone to get into the room. We've got a few hundred people who have joined us today on a Wednesday evening to talk about Eric Adams and everything going on, which we think is pretty cool. So I'm just going to wait for everybody to come in because Zoom takes a little while to have everyone trickle in, and then we will get started. It's incredible to see that there are 334 people and counting coming into this Zoom right now to make sense of what's going on in the city from the city crew. And we got a lot of questions from folks about what's happening, which we will get to. All right, I think that we are reaching critical mass, so I'm going to begin. Hello, everybody. I'm Rachel Holliday Smith. I'm the managing editor of the City Newsroom. And I really am so glad that there's so many people who took time out of their week to learn about what's going on and to engage a little bit with the craziness that's happening in the city right now. We got almost 1,000 people who signed up to come to this tonight, which just is incredible. And we got more than 200 questions, very, very good questions from our readers who RSVP to this about what's going on. We definitely will not get to all of them, but we'll try to do our best. I sort of sorted them into buckets of the things that we can tackle tonight. A programming note that you will be able to ask questions as we speak, and we will take questions at the end. But you should ask those questions in the Q&A section, not the chat. We will only be able to sort through them and see them if you ask it in the Q&A section. So type those questions in the Q&A and we will sort through them and ask and answer some of those questions at the end. So there's a lot going on. This has been an extraordinarily busy news week, as all the people on the Zoom can attest to. They've been doing incredible work. And things could change by this time tomorrow. So we'll just do our best to take stock of the moment right now and deal with breaking news as it comes. But let's just start with what we know. President Trump's Justice Department is moving to drop all the federal criminal charges, federal corruption charges against Mayor Eric Adams. In the wake of that, multiple federal prosecutors have resigned. Multiple deputy mayors at City Hall have announced their departures. And the mayor is increasingly aligning himself with the Trump administration. And all of this is happening, and in the middle of all of this political storm, the families and communities of immigrants in New York are caught in the middle, and they are becoming targets by ICE raids, and asylum seekers are in limbo, to say the least. So we'll tackle all of that. Let's get into all of this. And I want to first introduce my amazing colleagues who have been truly hustling so hard to get good, accurate information out this week. First is Greg B. Smith. Hey, Greg, how you doing?
Super.
Katie Honan, who is our City Hall reporter. Hey, Katie.
Hey, Rachel. Sorry,
Hello.
it's going crazy behind me.
And Gwen Hogan. Hey, Gwen.
Hi.
Who covers a lot of things, but has been especially great on covering the migrant crisis in the last couple of years. So let's start with questions. It will not surprise probably anyone on this call to hear that the most popular question that we got out of the hundreds of questions we got when we made this event was some version of how can the mayor be removed from his position? We actually have written a couple of guides on that question exactly, which we will put into the chat now. So you can read along if you'd like to, or save it for later. We will get to that in more depth, but very quickly, there are two paths to force the mayor out. The first is that the governor can do it. That's by the state constitution. And on the city level, there is something called an inability committee that has the power to get the city council to vote to remove the mayor. But let's start with Governor Kathy Hochul. She has the power to throw out the NYC mayor, but this has never been done before. In 1932, FDR moved to do this against Mayor Jimmy Walker, but Walker resigned before FDR had a chance to actually make that happen. So if Kathy Hochul uses this power, it'd be a first. So Gwen, I want to start with you. You were outside of Kathy Hochul's office yesterday as she met with key leaders to talk this out and to talk out sort of how she was feeling right now about what she's going to do if she's going to move against Adams. What was that like? What was the scene like there? And what can we say about what she's thinking right now?
Yeah, this was there was definitely a bit of theatrics about this on Monday, sort of as the news broke that these three very competent deputy mayors announced their resignations. As that was breaking, Hochul was finding herself under pressure to do something. Everybody was sort of looking at her like, what are you going to do? So she put out this announcement that day saying she would convene at her New York City offices these key leaders throughout the day to sort of gauge what they were thinking. And so, like every reporter in the city, tons of reporters and cameras, and it's sort of a big spectacle as these key people are arriving. We later learned some of these meetings happened over Zoom, so they never showed up to the offices. But there were three people that came over the course of the day in person. We saw Council Speaker Adrian Adams come in, City Controller Brad Lander, and also the Reverend Al Sharpton. And two of those people, Brad Lander and Al Sharpton, spoke to reporters. And through those conversations, we learned a little bit about this meeting with Hochul. Basically, she is going to wait and see what happens with the criminal case, unsurprisingly. So while there was sort of all this building pressure that like maybe she might use this power, she put out this statement saying she was considering it. We now know that sort of it was an attempt to kind of give herself a little bit more time and collect thoughts. And definitely nothing is going to happen before we know what's happening in the federal corruption case on that in that regard.
And we don't really know what's going to happen with the federal corruption case for a while, and we'll get to that because Greg was in court today listening to a hearing on that case, and we'll get to that. But she's basically, like you said, she's buying some time here, and she's also emphasizing, I remember this from what she put out there publicly, that she really is not taking this lightly. She doesn't want to, remove a duly elected official just sort of quickly, and she's saying, hold on, let's pause and sort of take this slow.
And I will just add, we didn't see a statement from her office after those meetings. She did do a press conference related to congestion pricing, which is a whole other crazy can of worms that happened today. But she sort of got multiple questions about Mayor Eric Adams today, and she refused to answer any of them. She was completely focused on the congestion pricing situation.
Okay.
So we still really haven't heard from her what her exact timeline is around this.
And there is an option for the city council to take action to remove the mayor. We're going to get to that a little bit later. But first, I'm going to go to Greg. Let's talk about where the federal charges stand. So you were in federal court today at a hearing with Judge Dale Ho. You just published a story about this, actually, like a half an hour ago. So good job filing, getting that done, and then coming to this. So what happened in the courtroom? What happens now with the charges against Adams?
So essentially what's happening is that the Justice Department, the Trump Justice Department, has filed a motion before Judge Dale Ho to dismiss the case against Eric Adams. But under the rules of the Department of Justice, they need to have a judge approve it. The judge is pretty restricted in what he can do in terms of saying no, but it's been done. You might remember Michael Flynn, who had pled guilty to essentially lying to the FBI, and then withdrew his plea, and then the Justice Department came in and said, we want to dismiss the case. The judge in that case appointed a special counsel to look into the circumstances behind this. But before that was resolved, Trump pardoned Flynn. So Dale Ho is stepping into kind of uncharted waters. And what happened today was that the Department of Justice, in the personage of Emile Beauvais, who I've been pronouncing his name Bove for about a week now, and I feel really bad about that. So Beauvais came in and said, there is no quid pro quo here. The reason people think there is quid pro quo, a quid pro quo is essentially pay for play, essentially is that they filed the motion to dismiss the charges against Mayor Eric Adams with a caveat. Caveat is without prejudice. And what that means is that if they choose, they can refile the charges pretty much at any time. And what's being a lot of people, including the Southern District U.S. Attorney who resigned over this, have characterized this quid pro quo. And the concept of it is that they essentially asserted that one of the reasons that they wanted to dismiss the case was because it was distracting Eric Adams from assisting them in their effort to deport undocumented migrants. And so what the argument is essentially is that leverage. If you have the possibility of refiling the cases, is this coercive? And if it's coercive, then it would be essentially a bad faith effort that is not in the public interest. And that is essentially what Judge Ho has to confront. Today, he punted and he said, I'm going to think about it. He asked a lot of questions that I thought indicated that he's seriously thinking about making them come back in and explain themselves, including having people testify under oath about how they came to this. And that would include the acting U.S. Attorney Danielle Sassoon, who resigned rather than do this. And she's kind of the center of the universe in this thing that is going to play out. The judge also said he doesn't want this to drag on. So, today is Wednesday. I don't see this happening before the end of the week, but it's going to happen pretty soon.
Did he give an exact time frame, or it sounds like no?
They never do. He's a federal judge. He can do whatever he wants. He's got a lifetime appointment. So, but he did say, I don't want this to drag on.
Yeah.
And so they have to, he's going to address it. It's the question is essentially, is he going to make them come in and explain themselves?
Right.
More than they have, which they really did not do today, by the way.
And just to refresh people's memory, if we could drop into the chat our coverage of the letter from that federal prosecutor, Danielle Sassoon, and what she said, because I think it's in a really important document for people to read. That'd be great if we could drop that in the chat. Katie, I'm going to go to you to talk about just like, what is the mood at City Hall like right now? Like, what is the vibe? And what is Adams like right now? You're in the room with him a lot. What's it like?
Well, I haven't been in the room with him for a long time because he's hiding from the reporters. But in talking to, it's twofold. I work at City Hall every day, and I often think this would be annoying if this was my office and people who were antagonizing me at all times were around, which is what I'm doing, I guess. But it is my job to do that. And it's twofold, right? In talking to sources, it's confusion. It's a lot of people questioning what they're going to do. If you work for a specific deputy mayor who's now leaving, you might be really passionate about the work that you're doing, but their departure is giving you a little bit more pause about whether you wanted to stay. And mind you, I've been speaking to people for months and months, and they felt this way even since the indictment and the charges, even like at the start of some of our investigations now over a year ago, looking at their colleagues who are, from our reporting, seem to be compromised in some way. So there's that. And, the mayor has not had his weekly off-topic Tuesday, as we call it, for 2 weeks. I asked the deputy mayor for communications, what's the deal? They don't have much answer. We kind of have to just go out and try to ask the mayor questions ourselves. I will say last week the mayor had a unrelated press conference before he was meeting with the border czar, and they were very on topic only. And New York One reporter Dan Rivoli just asks questions. I think as reporters you have to any kind of politeness or any benefit of the doubt to the mayor of New York City and his staff when they're asking you on topic only, when there are very much more pressing questions to ask. You just have to ask them. We asked the mayor questions yesterday at Bellevue Hospital. He had a press conference with the police commissioner. A police officer had been shot. We asked him after, just questions about the case and the departure of his deputy mayors. So that's really the mood. And I will say, in speaking to a lot of people, you know, both city employees and the non-city workers, I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I would just quit. I would just quit." You know, I don't need to tell our people watching this, New York is a very expensive city, and not everyone can say, screw you, I'm out of here, for a number of reasons, and I think financially is one of them.
And also, these are people's careers. I mean, they've been working at this for a long time. I'd actually like to ask you, like, can you give an example of something that one of these deputy mayors that is now leaving oversees, and sort of like how big are their portfolios, and like how much does this affect like the day-to-day of kind of government work?
Their portfolios are huge, right? When you look at Anne Williams Isom, I'll think of just off the bat, Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services. You know, when she took the job, she's probably, what is Health and Human Services, coming out of the peak of the pandemic, dealing with hospital systems, maternal health, some of these initiatives. But then she soon overtook the asylum seeker crisis. That kind of became the bulk of what she's working on. So when you think of the hundreds of thousands of people who came to New York City, she was overseeing their care and what's happening with them. Mira Zoshi, the deputy mayor for operations, overseeing the parks department, DEP, sanitation. When her portfolio includes just the streets and the construction. And I know another big thing she's been working on is design build, would make it easier. Basically, you'd be able to build things in the city faster and cheaper. That's a huge part of the city, especially when we're not focused on federal corruption charges. We're looking at, why do libraries take so long to be built? Why is my street blocked off for months for construction? That kind of thing. Marie Torres Springer, who is only for the last few months has been the first deputy mayor. Before that, she was overseeing the economy and housing. I know the mayor took all the credit, but I think it was a lot of goodwill that Marie Torres Springer had that passed City of Yes, which is going to facilitate tens of thousands of units of housing over the next decade. And then Chauncey Parker, who is the deputy mayor, again, newly given this role, deputy mayor for public safety, again, all the public safety initiatives, and not just the police department, but mayor's office of criminal justice and those kind of things. So these are for people who do a lot of work. And again, they have huge teams of people. They're not all leaving, not as of yet, but there's a lot of consequential things happening from within their portfolios.
And remind us when those people are actually going to leave, like leave the building. They're still working now, but
they're still there. And, I'd heard mid-March.
okay.
I think there's going to be, I saw Melissa Russo from WNBC reporting that it's staggered departures. And there's been lots of names floated. The New York Times reported Kaz Daughtry, who's in the police department. You can just look at some of our previous reporting about Kaz Daughtry if you're so inclined. He would be the deputy mayor for public safety. I heard today one name for deputy mayor for operations is Department of Transportation Commissioner Ydanis Rodriguez. What my reporting has shown is people have been asked, and we don't know what's going to happen. If you're a commissioner at an agency, you might not be so jazzed to then suddenly become a deputy mayor in City Hall if you're happy with the work you're doing.
Yeah, especially in this moment.
Exactly.
Of not knowing what's going on. Let's talk a little bit about the inability committee, this thing that's in the city charter that allows the mayor to be removed. I'll just quickly recap to say that this is in the city charter. It's basically this 5-person panel that has to be convened to then vote. 4 people have to vote out of 5 to send the decision to the city council to remove the mayor from his position. It's never been used before. It is one of 2 options for removing a mayor. The other one is from Governor Hochul. So I'm curious if anybody is actually moving to do this. It seems like it's really up in the air right now. There's some people saying, yes, let's do it. But then other key people who are like, whoa, let's not use this. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, just briefly. So the 5-member panel, it's Council Speaker Adrian Adams, Controller Brad Lander, the longest serving borough president at the moment, which is Donovan Richards in Queens, the Corporation Council, Muriel Guttrafant, and a deputy mayor of the mayor's choosing. So I think there's questions of, okay, well, I mean, would his corporation counsel and his deputy mayor, if his choosing, vote to kick him out? Maybe not. Um, Speaker Adams yesterday said, asked her about it specifically, and she said this, the inability committee was first became a thing in 1987 when then Mayor Ed Koch had a stroke. So she's really stuck on this idea of your physical inability. She said the mayor's still breathing, he's still physically fine. That's it. I know Comptroller Brad Lander, who's also his opponent for the primary, said that if the mayor didn't have some sort of plan or updates on who would replace the deputy mayors, he would call it on Friday. But I know you would ask, I asked people, so like, okay, if it gets formed, like what happens? Is it like a little bat signal? The inability committee, like, do they have a group chat? Like, how does it, and there's really the formula of it, the not formula,
The process.
the process of how it gets called. I'm like, where do they meet? Nobody knows. Like, is it public? So because it's never been done before. So I think Governor Hochul calling in so many members of the inability committee, part of me thinks she was hoping like, so do you guys want to do this?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I'm sure that's what some of what they talked about. Okay, I'm gonna zoom out a bit here beyond the process questions and the the obscure city charter lines that may become a big part of our lives. Going back to Gwen, I just want to talk to you because you've done so much reporting about the migrant crisis in the past couple of years. The people who have arrived here recently are really like at the center of all of this political drama. They're they're in the middle of this conversation between Trump and Adams. You've been covering this like since those first buses arrived from Texas. Can you just give us a sense of how those families and how those communities are feeling as all of this unfolds and as their status is really quite in limbo?
Yeah, I mean, I would take a step even further back and say, like, this is actually much broader than just the migrants that arrived in the past 2 years, because I think, some of the people that may be the easiest to deport have been in the country for decades and had an outstanding warrant of deportation and grew up in this country. And so like we know that there's many tens of thousands of undocumented New Yorkers who I think that the fear of potential immigration crackdowns is much broader than just folks that arrived in the past 2 years. But we have seen with our colleagues over at Chalkbeat, we did some reporting sort of in the days after the inauguration where we spent a little bit of time at some of the shelters and found that a lot of families were really afraid of sending their kids to school because there had been the Trump administration revoking this longstanding ICE guidance about not doing immigration enforcement at schools. And in the sort of misinformation about what that was and what it would mean, people were like, oh, they're going to do raids at schools. Therefore, it will be safer for my kids to be at this shelter with me. We've seen attendance go, dip in those days. The last time I checked, it was looking a little bit better. And again, a lot of this is anecdotal because people are really afraid and like it's hard to get people to talk to you. And there's all kinds of rumors spreading about where ICE was seen all over the city. I'm sure you guys are seeing it in your networks or on social media. Um, and I will say, it's been about a month. There was a week in, we saw DHS Kristi Noem come to New York City and do this sort of highly photographed, very flashy raid where they said they made a number of arrests. And it's been extremely difficult to get any confirmed information about who was actually arrested. There were statements sort of about a few people, a few names, one person facing federal charges, another person who was charged in Queens, or a couple of people that were picked up with the NYPD in Queens. But we've been able to confirm, at least in the first 2 weeks, there were about 100 arrests. We don't know much about almost any of those people. But there continue to be these sightings, and we've definitely seen community groups sort of activate, mutual aid groups activate around trying to watch neighborhoods and report sightings if ICE is seen. But it's clear that the Trump administration needs the city's help if they're going to be able to accomplish this sort of widespread crackdown on undocumented immigrants of all kinds. And so that seems to be the fight that we're in now. And we saw that with border czar Tom Homan visiting New York City, meeting with Eric Adams last week, and then, their array of media appearances together, one in which the border czar said he would crawl up Eric Adams's butt if Eric Adams didn't maintain his end of the bargain. And we saw shortly after that meeting, Eric Adams make a concession, which is that he would use an executive order to allow ICE back onto Rikers Island. That executive order has not hit the books yet, so we don't know what that will look like, if that is going to actually come. But it does seem like the federal government wants more from New York City police officers and corrections officers in terms of what they're able to do on enforcement.
Okay. So I'm going to open the questions up to some of the folks who are asking questions in the Q&A in a moment. But I first want to, I got to do a plug for our amazing newsroom. So we're putting a QR code up here for donations. If you want to help our newsroom, help Gwen, help Katie, help Greg do the reporting. We are a nonprofit newsroom. We work on reader donations. We work on philanthropic donations. And we are never paywalled. We do not paywall our stories. Our reporting is free and open to anyone who wants to read it. You do not have to give, but if you can and you really like our reporting, please, chip in. That would be much, much appreciated. We are always wanting to do more reporting and more stories and better and deeper and more investigations, but we don't have the resources to do it all. So every bit helps, and truly anything that you can give really does go straight to our reporting and straight to digging out more information for New Yorkers. So I'm going to leave that up on the screen for just a moment as we go to more questions. So for all three of you, I'd like some sort of input on this kind of tough question we got from a reader, if you can give an answer, which is, what does Donald Trump really even want here? Like, why is he messing with New York City, and what is he getting out of it? Gwen, I'll start with you just because I think some of what you just touched on does go to that. But Greg, Katie, think about that question as well. Like, what do you think? Why is he doing this? But Gwen, I'll start with you.
He's a New Yorker. He loves New York, right? I mean, the MSG rally, right, was very symbolic for him. Like, he
Right before the
was
election, you mean?
able, this
Yeah.
was right before the election, right? He was able to summon all of his supporters to Midtown Manhattan, this place that had voted not for him and was not a fan of his policies. He was sort of able to have this triumphant return. I mean, I don't know. I'm not in the man's mind, but I think that, obviously he's from here. He built his empire here.
Yeah, I think also people will write books about trying to answer this question, and perhaps, we could ask psychologists rather than reporters. But we'll take a stab. Katie, Greg, do you have thoughts on this? Like, why is he doing any of this?
Just briefly, I think what you have is President Trump. Oh, yeah, he's a New Yorker, and he's also, getting to the outer borough psychology. He's from Queens, and I think he always wanted to be accepted in the Manhattan-centric real estate world. Anyway, then you get into, his audience is the Fox News audience. If you watch Fox News, the message is New York is a hellhole. Someone has to come in and save New York. We have to fix New York. So I think the symbolism of him having this over the mayor's head, as he can come in, like what he tweeted today about congestion pricing, long live the king, I've saved Manhattan, I've saved New York. That is what we're looking at. It's all, to me, from what I've read about him and what I see here, that is what we have in this. And, Greg could add more.
Yeah, all you have to do is look at the motion to dismiss. They specifically, why are they bringing up immigration? What does that have to do with criminal case? And it's because, and the way they did it with the without prejudice, is that they have leverage over him over an issue that they explicitly referenced, where they specifically stated the indictment and the trial were interfering with the mayor's ability to assist them in their immigration enforcement initiative. That's pretty specific. And obviously this is Sanctuary City, and Eric Adams is not crazy about Sanctuary City. And at one point, in fact, I believe this is true, Gwen, correct me if I'm wrong, he is into like expanding ICE's ability to not just pick up people who have serious convictions, like of convictions on serious crimes that are the exemption from the interaction with the federal government, but he's into pretrial, cooperating with ICE on pretrial, which is that's like blowing off due process. So a person who's not, they're arrested and they're charged with the crime, but they're not necessarily convicted. He's totally into like turning those people over to ICE. This is the mayor I'm talking about. This is not the border czar. This is the mayor. So he's kind of like, I think they see him as potentially an ally. And it's even better when you have something to hold over his head to make sure that he remains an ally. Because, I mean, this guy says one thing on one day and the next day he says the opposite. So you never can tell what he's going to do. But in this particular case, I really think it's all about immigration. That's my gut feeling on it.
Gwen, I don't know if you want to add anything there. If not, I'll go to a related question from a reader. The question is, how are sanctuary practices in New York City already being eroded, and is there any recourse? It's a tricky question because, as you and I actually have written, sanctuary practices in the city are this kind of amorphous. It's not like there's a sanctuary booklet, handbook that lays out all the ways. It's sort of a mixture of laws and practices that aren't laws that make up the sanctuary city. Can you explain that in brief, if you can, and then talk about how those things are changing right now or may change?
Yeah, there are a bunch of there were executive orders, and then New York City codified it in a number of local laws in 2014 and 2017 that really made New York City have some of the strongest sanctuary protections out of any city. And what's interesting about, like, I think the main things that they did, for example, we had the NYPD and DOC, the corrections department, they made pretty big changes from these local laws. Previously, there had been a lot of cooperation between the corrections department and ICE. So ICE was on Rikers Island, and if somebody was arrested, ICE, in what I've been told by attorneys that worked there at the time, had free reign of Rikers Island. So they could sit down and interview people who didn't necessarily know they were talking to ICE agents, which could later be used against them in immigration court. And when people were released, sometimes if they had been wrongfully arrested, not even necessarily after a conviction, or maybe it was a minor offense and they had served 2 weeks or whatever it was, as they were being released, they would get handed right over to ICE. And then that would send them, even though they had their freedom, because for whatever the criminal case was, they would be on the pipeline to deportation. And that, the year before this law passed, the city council speaker estimated that about 3,000 people were funneled into deportation proceedings. Some of them may have been people charged with serious crimes, and some of them weren't. As it stands now, New York State cooperates with ICE. So if you do hard time and you have to go upstate because you had a gun charge or whatever it was, you are funneled into ICE immediately. So you can be deported if you do crimes. ICE has free reign to do that in New York. But the sanctuary laws stopped that coordination. So it made ICE's job a little bit harder. If they knew somebody was going to be released, they would have to use their own resources to figure out how to detain that person. And the other very firm thing that the city laws was stop any city agencies from cooperating with ICE, from expending any city resources with ICE for the purposes of immigration enforcement. So New York City officials can cooperate with ICE if there's an underlying criminal case or, you know, a federal investigation into domestic terror or whatever it is. But if the underlying violation is a civil immigration one, they're not allowed to. And there were pretty firm practices in place after those laws were passed. But you know, if your boss is saying that you don't think the laws are real, there is sort of some discretion there, right? And we've seen, it's a little bit hard to keep tabs on all this, but we have begun, like, there have been some examples where it seems like the law was violated, but it's really hard to prove after the fact. And the person who it was potentially violated is now in ICE custody, and it's like almost impossible to get in touch with them. So that's sort of a question. We haven't seen it sort of breached broadly, although there has been reporting out there that actually corrections and ICE have maintained kind of a cozy relationship through emails that were obtained from Freedom of Information requests a couple years ago. It's a little unclear what the status is now, but they're definitely in flux, and we're waiting to see really what this first executive order is, which is kind of the first inclination that the laws might actually start to shift before we sort of see what that looks like.
Okay. I'm gonna go through some reader questions because we've got a lot and we may bounce around to different topics, but we'll just keep rolling with it. I'm gonna answer this one, which is, we got a question in the chat that was, is there a good chance that Jumaane Williams, who is the public advocate for folks that don't know, would become the acting New York City mayor if Adam is out? What's the conversation around that possibility? Correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, but I believe that yes, he would become the mayor if the mayor stepped down or if he was forced out. Jumaane Williams is the first in line under the city charter to become the mayor. That's correct. Yeah. So that is what would happen. And Katie, we also got a lot of reader questions about the upcoming primary election, and which is on June 24th, by the way. Mark your calendars.
Those are voting.
Early voting, that's true. Early voting. But can you give like a really brief overview of kind of what the field of candidates looks like right now? I know it's super early. And then also, we got to talk about the specter of our former governor, Andrew Cuomo, on this race, because he could jump in. But talk to us a little bit about what the candidates are looking like right now.
Yeah, I mean, we have a full candidate list online, you know, Brad Lander, Scott Stringer, Zoran Mamdani, Zelnor Myrie, Jessica Ramos, Michael Blake, oh God, Whitney Tilton.
This is a quiz, by the way.
I do feel pop quiz.
We're actually going to drop in the chat our guide on the candidates so people can read about them if they're not familiar. And I will say that that's not an official list because they haven't actually petitioned to get on the ballot, which happens very soon, but it's the people who have publicly announced, but continue.
Yeah, petitioning begins later in February, it goes through April 3rd, and that's when we'll see who gets on the ballot. Obviously, there's been matching fund distributions, and the looming Andrew Cuomo stuff is he hasn't officially announced, you know, petitioning hasn't started yet, so it's not like he's tried. He released a video last week that felt like a campaign video. His emissaries have been, you know, leaking little stories. He might run. What do you want to ask us for comment? But he's someone who does very well in polls, and we'll be talking about polls later this week at the city. He does incredibly well in polls, and the 5 polls, 6 polls, they always have him on top, beating Adams, beating the other primary candidates. Of course, viewing a poll that way, this is when someone has not officially run, it's just the you know, the hypothetical at that point.
It's also, I will say, it's name recognition. I mean, a lot of the people who have said that they are candidates right now aren't as nearly as well known as Andrew Cuomo. That's very clear.
Right. And you don't have, if he was a real candidate, an official candidate, I think you'd have a lot of oppo. I mean, that being said, Zelnor Myrie's campaign today put out a Quiet Cuomo website criticizing him for not being critical of Trump in the last few months. So there's a lot. And I know I've said this before. So my colleagues don't agree with me. I still feel like it's 2021. So the fact that we're going through this again, I know that was technically 4 years ago, but it's a much different race than what we had in 2021 because you do have an incumbent, but an incumbent who has a lot of other challenges. And I think a lot of these people, money matters a lot. We're interviewing all the candidates on the FAQ podcast too. Money matters a lot. And you need money to then get ads, and then you get into other like third party spending, people running IEs, all this kind of complicated stuff that can alter races. But
Yeah. And we also, I would just say, just so people have it in their minds, Cuomo, if he wanted to jump in, he could jump in the Democratic primary, or he could jump in as an independent. And we wouldn't know until he officially does that until like between late April and late May, because that's when he would have to petition to get on as an independent. And we wrote a story about that as well, which we actually just dropped in the chat. So it could be up in the air for a long time. I will also say that if Adams is forced out or pushed out before late March, we would have a special election, which would then be a whole nother can of worms because it would be open, meaning Democrats, independents, and Republicans could just jump into that, meaning that Cuomo could jump into something like that as well. It would also be ranked choice, which makes it even more interesting. So very quickly, Greg, we did get some questions about matching funds, which for folks who don't know, are the taxpayer-funded campaign funds that actually help candidates run and pay for things for their campaign. New York City has an 8-to-1 system where for every dollar you raise, you get $8 in public funds. Adams, if he runs, is not going to get matching funds, maybe. Can you talk to us about the status of him and matching funds, and how much that would make a difference for him if he does continue to run?
Sure. I mean, it's huge. I mean, he's asked for 4 million on top of the money that he's raised. And the problem he faces is that we haven't really talked at all about the substance of the indictment. Like, what is he charged with? And what he's charged with is bribery and campaign finance fraud. The bribery has to do with him receiving these travel perks, what his lawyer keeps referring to as the airline upgrade indictment. But it's $120,000 worth of upgrades, but also free hotels, and the travel's international, and it's all paid by essentially the Turkish government. And so he gets this ridiculous kind of petty benefit, but he also gets another benefit. And the other benefit is he's raising money from these Turkish government connected people who are doing what's called a straw donor scheme. And the point of campaign finance disclosure laws is that you, the public, who are going to vote for these people, know who's giving him money, right? So you can just see it. But when you have a straw donor, you can't see who's really giving it. And in the indictment, they're alleging that he was routinely soliciting and obtaining illegal straw donations. That is, the money came from somebody else, but when you look at who the donation purported to be from, it wasn't from that person. And in some cases, it was from people who are connected to the Turkish government. And also international donations are illegal. So to get back to matching funds. So the problem with all of that is that the Campaign Finance Board looked at that and looked at the indictment specifically and said, your representation to us in 2021 that all these illegal donations, according to the feds, were legitimate donations. You told us they were legitimate. And so we gave you matching funds for this because their position again, because you lied to us about this, then we are no longer going to allow you to continue to collect matching funds in the 2025 re-election campaign. And that's what just happened fairly recently, where they rejected his request for this. And it's a real kick in the teeth because it's $4 million that he was, I assume, counting on that he can't get at the moment.
Yeah.
This all could change, by the way, because if they dismiss, if the indictment the indictment dismissal request is approved, what does that do to the dynamic? Does
Right.
that then allow Adams to come back and say, hey, this wasn't a problem. I want my money. And look, I can't predict the future, but on that particular case, I can't imagine he would not do that.
I mean, multiple millions of dollars in a local race like this is an enormous
It's
amount.
huge. It's huge. It's
I know
huge.
we typically think of like campaign funds nationally as much more than that. But in local races, that's an enormous amount of money, and it pays for a lot of staffers, pays for a lot of ads, it pays for a lot of flyers. So, if he got that money back mid cycle or late in the cycle, that could be a real game changer.
Let me add one thing with that. He can't raise money now.
Uh-huh.
Like he's having a real hard time and nobody's giving him money. His legal defense fund, he has a legal defense fund. He's like, I don't know, 300,000 in the hole on that thing because nobody's giving him money anymore. Why? Because he's indicted and he's facing trial. And now he's got this alleged quid pro quo thing going on with Trump. So
Right.
the matching funds become even more important to him with that dynamic in play.
Okay. We did get a bunch of questions from readers about what will happen if the charges are successfully dropped by the DOJ or the DOJ is successful in getting those dropped. How else could Adams be prosecuted, if at all? What other investigators could go after him, and like, could anything else stick to him? Can you answer that?
I'm so glad you brought that up.
A lot of our readers brought it up.
So today, this is craziness, by the way, the continuing craziness. So when Emile Beauvais on February 10th ordered Danielle Sassoon, the acting Manhattan U.S. attorney, to dismiss the case, he put in his little memo that not only do you have to you got to drop the case, but there is no more targeting of the mayor or investigative effort. Okay, this is in his memo. Today, he comes into court and Judge Ho, to his credit, asked him about that. Like, what's up with this? And all of a sudden, Emile says, no, anybody can investigate him, and including about this. And so to answer the question, there's multiple ways to investigate Eric Adams, despite all of this dismissal talk. And that includes, apparently, according to Emile, the Southern District. But he's got all these other people around him that are also under investigation. We haven't talked about that either. That there's a bunch of deputy mayors who had to, not the most recent crop that resigned, but the prior crop of deputy mayors who fled the building because they had their cell phones taken away by the feds or by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. And so that's another factor in this thing. Since he has already indicted Eric Adams, building commissioner, and Eric Adams, chief advisor, Ingrid Lewis Martin, who is allegedly the closest advisor to the mayor. He's already looking at them. So there's a lot of things that could happen that we can't see what's going on behind the curtain yet, but this ain't over.
Yeah. And we'll be following all of it. I will also say that all of what Greg just mentioned, we have been following for months, if not years, all of the different cases with the aides to Adams who are facing different charges and investigations. So we've got a lot on that if you want to look on our website. I will also say we've got a lot of questions in the chat from people asking if this is going to be recorded and if they'll get a copy of this conversation. Yes, we'll send it out to folks after the fact. So you can, if you want more and you want to replay this for friends, knock yourself out. I'm just going to run through a couple of quick questions. Did Adams return the matching funds he's charged with illegally collecting in 2021?
Oh,
Is that a no?
Well, no, what happened, nothing is simple, right? So fairly recently, first they shoot down his request for the 2025 matching funds, but then, and they didn't do this publicly, they did this kind of behind the scenes. This is another FOIL request, which, all three of us spend our lives writing FOIL requests every day, most of which are ignored. But fairly recently, there was a letter from the Campaign Finance Board warning him that they could move to claw back the $10 billion that he was awarded in the 2021 because that he obtained some of them through fraud. So to answer the question it's possible.
Oh my gosh. And I will say for the folks who aren't familiar with the acronyms that we all use in the newsroom, a FOIL request is a Freedom of Information Law request, which is the law that allows anybody, not just reporters, to access documents and records that are used in government.
It is no, it's not. It's freedom of banging your head against the wall.
Yes, we could have a whole other event just about FOIL. Okay. This is a question we got from somebody who RSVP'd. It's a general question, and anybody can jump in on this one. Besides immigration, what other city policies might Mayor Adams align with the Trump administration on? Maybe Katie, you could take that one. Are there other topics, policies that the mayor has already spoken about that he, has a commonality with the Trump administration on, other than immigration?
Public safety, the mayor ran in 2021 on the cop pro public safety mayor. That oh god.
Trying to think of
They
like
both
what
hate
else.
press. They
They
both
bo-
hate press.
They both really are very anti-press. I mean, we have seen that again and again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and Eric Adams has always been a more moderate Dem. Obviously, he formerly was a registered Republican in the 90s. So there's a lot there. Yeah, and I think within the last year and a half, and our colleague Yoav wrote about the mayor's shift, back in 2018, he was calling Trump a white supremacist and very critical of him particularly over the last year. And then, when Trump's running again, and then when he seems like he might win, and then maybe he could help him if he does win, the mayor really took on, he started saying, I'm not Democrat or Republican, my heart, I bleed red, white, and blue, things like that. Which is, it's a lot of stuff you might even hear at a Trump rally. This very patriotic, rah-rah America stuff. And that is what he's been taking on. But yeah, I would say immigration, public safety, and hating the media.
Yeah. I'll answer this one.
I'm sorry. Can I just throw something else in here?
Sure.
I mean, people keep forgetting this. Okay, so according to some, including the former Manhattan U.S. attorney, this is a quid pro quo that's going on here, and that they have this guy on a leash. How much the Trump organization, how much interaction do they have with the city of New York? Wouldn't it be nice for the Trump organization to have the mayor in their pocket? I mean, that's another thing about this guy. This guy, by the way, he doesn't divest. He's still totally involved in it. And so that's another positive thing for him that's another thing that he gets out of the mayor.
Okay. I'm going to answer just one quick question on congestion pricing. Somebody asked, please touch on the latest executive order from Trump re-congestion pricing and the next steps and possible outcomes. It was actually not an executive order. It was a directive from the Federal Highway Administration that basically said we're going to revoke the previous approval that we gave to the local transit officials to do congestion pricing. We had a story on that today from our transit reporter, Jose Martinez, which we'll drop in the chat. What's happening with that? I mean, this is going to be an ongoing legal battle, yet another thing that's up in the air, but the governor and the head of the MTA have very stridently said, we're not turning off the cameras, so they're still going to collect the tolls for now, and they're going to go to court to fight this. So it's going to end up in court. That's what we know right now. But you still will be told if you drive through the congestion zone. So know that. They are not backing down on shutting off the cameras. Okay, so we're wrapping up time, so I'm gonna start to wrap things up. But before we totally say goodbye, I'll ask our reporters here to think about just a prediction that you've got for the next, let's say, week in the city of New York about something that's going to happen. Because truly, we couldn't have guessed in the last 2 days all the things that have happened. And here we are with breaking news almost every day. So think about that for a moment. I'm going to ask to put up that card again to allow folks who want to support our work to do so. And I just really, again, want to thank people for being here. We have more than 400 people who are still here. You guys have sent us such good questions that I've made a list of all the ones that we definitely could not answer tonight, but that we are using to inform our reporting. Some of those include, who are the voices who still have Adam's ear, which is a great question that we will not answer right now, but I love that question. We got a lot of questions about federal funding and its impact on New York City. One of those questions was, what programs are most vulnerable? We are definitely thinking about that, and we'll do more coverage on that. So again, I'll just plug us and our newsroom. If you like our work, if you read our newsletter, if you like one of the reporters on this screen, if you follow us on social media and get something out of that, please support us. You don't have to. We will always be open to anyone who wants to read us. We don't have a paywall, but to make it free for everyone, we need the folks who can to pitch in. So thank you. All right, so I'm going to go back to our reporters. Katie, I'll start with you. What's your prediction for the next week in New York City?
The mayor's going to say something really crazy, but also kind of funny. And he's going to like think of the most like the funniest person you can imagine be deputy mayor. They might become deputy mayor.
The funniest person you can imagine. Yeah,
Like the most obscure, random, weird, like someone we wrote about who was under investigation. Maybe they'll become deputy mayor.
good one. That's a solid prediction. Greg, what's your prediction for the next week? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
That Kathy Hochul will do nothing. That's my prediction.
I think that's a safe one. Yeah, I think you're right. I think she's definitely going to wait for Judge Ho. That's going to take a while, and she's got to weigh her options, right? She's got to mull over all those leaders that she talked to yesterday. Gwen, how about you?
Yeah, I was gonna say that Mayor Adams is still the mayor in a week.
Oh, yeah, that's yeah. I can't imagine that the inability committee is going to get its act together in the next week and push him out. Although you never know. We are keeping a spreadsheet of all the city council members and their stance on the mayor right now. So if that number tips over into a significant portion, things could change. Thank you all for being here. We're right at 8 o'clock. I don't mean to keep everybody, all night. I love that everyone who is here is still here and, spent time with us tonight. It's awesome. So support local news. Thank you for reading. And thank you to all my incredible colleagues who were here tonight. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.